Today I want to stretch your thinking, if I can, help you think about technology. Some of you are just getting that, I know. Help you think about technology and particularly how technology impacts the way we enjoy or experience sacred things. And one of those sacred things is the family. But before we launch into that, I want to tell you a little bit about my own home country. Alaska, the Alaskan wilderness, is a sacred thing. Its majesty is ultimate on earth and penultimate only in the presence of God. It is amazingly beautiful. It's overwhelming. It is simultaneously seductive and scary. The contrasts are spectacular. The silence of a mountain meadow, the thundering crack of a calving glacier, hundreds of thousands of salmon migrating up the streams, followed by flocks of the Alaskan state bird, the mosquito. You don't consume Alaskan's wilderness. It consumes you. It's so much bigger than you are. And being present in the Alaskan wilderness is a sacred or focal practice. It requires discipline. Requires training, it requires conditioning and preparation. It involves labor and attention and toil and often real misery at 60 or 70 below. You can't experience the wilderness from outside of its context. You can't. You have to be in it, engaged with it, even if it's difficult and hard to comprehend its wonder. It's not for everybody, but only for those who can endure the heartache and the hardship of it, and therefore enjoy the wonder of it. Now, over the last decade or so, entrepreneurs have attempted to create something that brings the Alaskan wilderness to everybody, especially those who don't really want to be present in the wilderness. Today, in any IMAX theater, probably for $17.50, you can go in and see a spectacular movie called Experience Alaska. It is breathtaking. It's an adventure in the Wrangell St. Elias Wilderness area, one of the most remarkable places in the world. The Bagley Ice Field is in the Wrangell St. Elias Wilderness area. It is the largest non-polar ice cap in the world. You land on that ice field and you're standing on 7,500 vertical feet of ice. It is absolutely remarkable. It's like it comes from a different planet, and this movie is spectacular, filmed over multiple seasons with hundreds of cameras and aircraft, and then edited from thousands of hours of footage. It really presents images of Alaska that most Alaskans will never ever see. Now, what do they do to accomplish that? There are three things specifically and one result. First, they have to take the wilderness and fragment it into its efficient parts. We have to decide what parts of the wilderness do people want and what parts do they not want. And then, so the beauty is wonderful, but the mosquitoes, we're not really into that. That is efficiency. Secondly, they try to make the experience predictable, to take the discomfort out of the wilderness. Put you in a beautiful seat where you know what's going to happen and you're not worried about any of the dangers that might accompany the wilderness. It's a mechanism to deliver it and make it available to anybody who wants some part of the experience. And then, of course, they put it in a totally controlled environment where the temperature is controlled, the sound is controlled, and sprawling across a digital high-definition megascreen supported by classical music and professional narration in Dolby quadraphonic surround sound, this movie delivers the beauty of Alaskan mountain majesty. But it's not an adventure in the Alaskan mountains. It's not. It's merely a fragment of the experience. It presents beauty without context, the wilderness without the wild, the dangerous without danger, the mountain meadow without the mosquitoes. See? And the point is this, that over time, When you experience Alaska this way, it doesn't even require that one actually be in Alaska. And so they come away from it saying, I've seen the Alaskan wilderness, but you hadn't seen doodly squat. You hadn't seen any of it. In fact, you've seen a facsimile of it, a shallow, thin presentation of something sacred and rich. And the sad thing is, over time, people begin to believe that that thin experience is good enough for all practical purposes. So we train ourselves to take less when no one can really say that they've seen the beauty of Mount St. Elias until they've stood at its base, looked up 19,000 feet at its peak from the cold, isolated beaches of Icy Bay. Now, why am I telling you this story? Well, my first reason is I want every single young leader from Biola to come to Alaska and help us reach that part of the world. So I want to entice you to come. But my real point today is to point out a pattern of thinking that is attendant to and unique to the advance of technology. Now, I love technology. In fact, I would say that probably everybody here is a product of a technological age. Doesn't matter how old you all are. We all grew up in rapidly advancing technology, and I love it. I love the benefits of it. I love the fact that I can turn on the heater and I don't have to go out to split the wood and stick it in the wood stove and keep it going all night. I like toilets instead of outhouses, don't you? I mean, those are technological. I'm really thankful that we can end tuberculosis and polio and things like that. But sometimes we miss how the worldview we develop in a technological age and how it impacts sacred things. You see, the goal of technology is to harness and control reality. That's its purpose. To tame the wild. To take the wilderness out of the wilderness. It makes life more efficient, more predictable, and more controllable. That's the goal of technology, to let us do more in less time, predict and measure the results, and have control over it. The problem is that sacred things, rich, thick, deep things, are seldom efficient, never predictable, and totally outside of our control. So technology actually is hostile to the development of grace among us. See, the problem is that we don't recognize it because we don't slow down. We're too wrapped up in it. And so we begin to take a shallow presentation of something that God meant to be rich and pretend that it's good enough for all practical purposes, but it fails to satisfy. Now, I'm convinced that's what we see happening in the family, particularly in the West, and specifically in the United States. Let's think about that for a minute. Did you know family is a sacred thing? God is family. It wasn't our idea to have families. You know, we're born into them. Family is non-negotiable. Good, bad, indifferent, broken or whole, you all got one. Can't get away from it no matter how hard you try. Family sticks with you. God created human family to mirror his image. We see plurality yet unity, diversity yet sameness, order yet equality. All those kinds of things are modeled in family. And family is uncontrollable by design. If you think about it, nothing less predictable than family. You know, go to a family reunion. What's going to happen? I don't know. Nobody knows. You know, I used to think that drinking was something you did at a Jarrell family reunion. I've learned as I get older, no, it's the way you survive a Jarrell family reunion. What is going to happen at a family reunion? Who knows? But that's my brother. Those are my cousins over there. That's my Uncle John. Family is full of comfort, but never fully comfortable. It's full of conflict, but it isn't all about conflict. Family's where we learn to forgive. It's where we learn to live in grace. It's where our greatest failures happen. It's where the deepest wounds in our lives are probably, given to us, as well as the greatest memories. It's where immature people grow up, and it's where social skills are learned. It's no wonder it's a wild place that you can't control. We don't consume family. Family consumes us. It is a thick, rich, deep thing that God intended for us to enjoy in its fullness. It's a primary value, I think, in the kingdom of God. And so that raises the question, if it is so sacred, whether it's your nuclear family or the church family or the eternal family, if it's so sacred, why is it so screwed up? And I think the answer is because we approach family with this pattern of technology. Fragment it, mechanize it, control it. Make it efficient, predictable, and controllable. Dissect the sacred thing. Focus on the parts you want. Expect those aspects of the family that you want to be your experience, and the things that you don't want to be something you get to avoid. So we see the benefits of family as commodities. We wind up looking at the family itself as a machine or a mechanism to produce those commodities for us. And we look at one another in our family as devices. And so if you don't come through for me as a family member, if my wife doesn't come through for me the way I expect her to, it's time to find a newer and better technology. Does that worldview sound familiar to you? Now, when we do that, we miss the gift of God's kingdom promises related to the family. So, missing the promises of God's kingdom is not a new thing. It's been happening since the very beginning of time. I think it's exaggerated in technological ages. Jesus, as he taught, his teaching is full of illustrations of the fact that people miss the kingdom of God. They get so wrapped up in a different kingdom, they miss what God has for them. In fact, many of his stories are really about that. You might say that Jesus' teaching was primarily to wake people up to a deeper kingdom, a richer reality, an abundant life. I came that you might have life and have it what? More abundantly. So the possibility of a greater life is at the center of all of his teaching. It's not a greater life in the sense that it's easier, but it's richer and deeper, a life that is beyond our control and thicker. I want you to consider with me in the time we have left today just one of Jesus' stories, one aspect of his teaching that I think was designed to emphasize what keeps us from understanding and enjoying the promises of God's kingdom, one of which is family, the way God expects us to. And the story is the story of the sower and the soil in Matthew 13. I want to read it as Matthew presents the story in Matthew 13, beginning in chapter 13, verse 1. He says, "That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered about him. So he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, 'A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and immediately sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. And other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear.'" Now, a couple of things I want you to notice here. There are three types of people in this parable that don't get it. And really the point of Jesus' parable is what keeps them from getting it. And if you'll allow me just a little bit of liberty, I'd like to approach this story with the pattern of technology in mind. See if we can apply it to the family. Three kinds of people who don't get it in terms of how to enjoy the promises of God's kingdom, the sacred things. The first type of person is the person who thinks life should be efficient. Look at how Jesus interprets the first person in his parable, beginning in verse 18. "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom, does not understand it," that is, stand under it, that's the idea, The evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. Now, how in the world do I get from that to efficiency? Well, let me talk you through it a little bit. What's wrong with the soil on the path? Huh? It's hard. Why is it hard? Because people are walking on it, right? Everybody's walking on it. Why is everybody walking on that path? Huh? It's the most efficient way to get to the place where everybody else is going. And the interesting thing is, you know, the gifts of God's kingdom, we will never, ever experience them if our primary goal is to walk in the same place where other people are walking, to efficiently get to the next place. The kingdom of God is enjoyed as you meander through life, not as you drive through it with some agenda on the freeway. You know, last night I came into LA. I'm from Alaska, right? Do you know what a traffic jam means in Alaska? Okay, that means the school bus stopped. Down here I fly into LAX. The super shuttle picks me up. We're driving, and I'm overwhelmed by the traffic. Last week I was in Portland, Oregon with my wife, and we were headed down to the airport, and because I knew the traffic would be bad, I did something that most of you would consider stupid. I jumped off the freeway and went down on Marine Drive. Marine Drive goes over to Portland along the Columbia River. It's a little windy, it's a little slower, there's no traffic. And what I enjoyed was the beauty of some of the wonder of Oregon. You know what I would have experienced on Interstate 84 and Interstate 205? I'd have been nothing but ticked off. Because you don't get where God wants you to go by going on the road that everybody's on. We will never discover the richness of family unless we get off this path of efficiency. Last week, my wife and I spent 4 nights and 5 days in Lincoln City, Oregon, there on the coast. It rained the whole time. But it didn't matter because we just enjoyed being together. But since it was raining, you know, one of the things that... There's an outlet mall in Lincoln City, guys. My blood runs anemic the minute you say mall. But I went with my wife, right? And I was thinking, well, I'll take my iPhone because then when she's shopping, I'll get a lot of stuff done. Efficiency, right? Because after all, I'm not going to sit in, maiden form and wait for my wife. So I'm sitting outside on the bench, but I didn't bring my iPhone. I just thought, no, I won't take it. And all day, for 2 days, we were at the outlet mall. The first day, all I thought was, how inefficient. What a waste of time. Boy, we accomplished nothing. When my wife got on the plane yesterday to go to Alaska and I came down here, she looked me in the eye and she said to me, Dan, thank you for the best 3 days I've had in the last 20 years. Accomplished nothing? What would it have been like if I'd have been texting or emailing or disconnected or having a relationship somewhere else? Driven to efficiency, after all, you can't waste time. The best things in life and your family will happen during wasted times. My prescription to every one of you, you think about your family, is plan on wasting some time. Culture driven to efficiency is full of pace and activity and connection technology. Sherry Turkle has written an amazing book called Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. And it's full of interviews, and one of the people she interviews is a young woman named Audrey, who was a high school student, and she's from divorced parents, a broken family, and Sherry writes, she says, like so many other children who tell me similar stories, Audrey complains of her mother's inattention when she picks her up at school or after sports events. She says her mom is focused on her cell phone, texting or talking to friends or work colleagues. Now listen to Audrey's description of the scene. She comes out of the gym, exhausted, carrying heavy gear. Her mother is immersed in her cell, Doesn't look up until Audrey opens the car door. Sometimes there's eye contact. Generally, she stays focused on the phone. Now, here's what Audrey says. It could have been 4 days since I last spoke to her, and then I sit in the car and wait in silence until she's done. Now, how does Audrey respond? She goes to her own cell phone. Audrey's mother thinks that they're both multitasking. But when Audrey's honest, she says, I have a fantasy of a mother waiting for me, expectant, focused on hearing about my day. She's resigned, however, that it's never going to happen. What in the world are we missing? The second kind of person I see in this text is the type who doesn't like life to be unpredictable. They think life should be predictable. And so you see the text says this. It says, as for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word, immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. When it gets hard, he falls away. They're not prepared for unwanted and unpredictable heartaches of life. You might say these are shallow expectations. It thinks family should be fun, should be comfortable, should be happy, should be predictable. And you know what? It should be those things to some level. But family is also hard. It's full of conflict. It is painful. It is disciplined. All those words you hate, right? Family is that as well. I have a friend who constantly says, you know, family wouldn't be nearly as hard if we didn't think it'd be so easy. We go into it thinking that it's going to be for better, not for worse, don't we? Every one of us does. But then something unpredictable happens, cancer, or a break in the economy, or that kind of thing. My dad died when I was 15 years old. I don't ever remember him telling me he loved me or that he was proud of me. He probably was. It was just that age, that age of man. But one day he had a headache. He went in to see the doctor. It turned out to be a rapidly growing malignant brain tumor. He was dead in 60 days. And what I regret most is my father came from the old school. He didn't want his 15-year-old son to see him suffer. So for 60 days, I didn't get to go into the hospital room and say goodbye to Dad. He didn't want any of us sharing his heartache. And I'm just telling you, people, that is the deepest regret of my masculine heart, is that I didn't get to cry with my father as he died. Because that's what family does. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to do it together. That's family. I don't know why I'm bowing down. That mic's not even on. Right? You ever notice that? We don't know. We're going to do it together. On the inside of my wedding ring is the Latin phrase, finis initium. That means finish what you initiated or complete what you started. Never say whoa in a mud hole. The time to say whoa is never. We're going to do it together, see? Family is like a tattoo. You're stuck with it. You're stuck with it. Well, one more. And that is the third type here I see is focused on control. This is the person who's sown, or the seed is sown among the thorns, and they hear the word, but the cares of the world, the deceitfulness of riches choke the word. It proves unfruitful. They are people who are they're focused on control. They're attempting to make life work for them, feathering their nest, working on their retirement, trying to make sure that nothing outside of their control happens. And yet the greatest things in family life are things you can't control. Kathy and I had 3 kids, biologically. My last one, James, was 10 pounds at birth. Kathy is 5 foot tall. He came in 20 minutes. Kathy's water broke at 5 o'clock in the morning. He was born at 5:20. I just wish he'd have played football more, because the guy, when he sees daylight, he goes for it, man. But wake up. But Kathy always thought we needed 4 kids. I took steps to make sure we didn't. And several years later, we got a call from Bethany Christian Services asking us if we'd consider praying about adopting a little biracial boy named Andrew. I said, no, I won't pray about that. Kathy said, well, I don't know how you can honor me without praying about it. So I went to prayer, and for the first time in my life, I don't know if you'd have heard it if you were there, but I heard the voice of God. And what God said to me was, since the day that little boy was conceived, I had your home in mind. Now, that was totally outside of my control. If you'd have given me the chance to control that, I never would have adopted Andrew. And if we'd have never adopted Andrew, we'd have never adopted Molly. And we would have had tons of money today. But an empty, shallow facsimile of richness. Efficiency, predictability, control. See, these are values of a technological age, and they're aimed at minimizing or reducing the contingency in life. But here's what I want you to hear. Life without contingency is life without grace. And grace is the only thing we've got. It's all we've got. It's what makes families work. Life without grace is thin and shallow and empty. The good soil in this parable, all it did was just receive the promise. And it produced fruit. See, it seems to me that in a technological world, we are very, very good at asking the question, what will this technology make possible or easier for us? I have a good friend who was at MIT when personal computers first really came out, and he worked on a team that the primary question they were supposed to answer was, how can we keep these things busy? Now that we've got these personal computers, what can they do? You know the question they never asked? What will it make impossible or more difficult for us? And that second question is the question we need to be asking as we lead families in an age of technology. Not against technology, but what in the world will it cost us? And that should affect the way we practice family. Now on Wednesday, we're going to talk about some low-tech habits for family in a high-tech age. But as I close today, I just want to read a letter, or I want to read a little bit of the way Sherry Turkle ends her book, Alone Together. This comes from her epilogue. I returned from Dublin to Boston in September 2009. I've brought my daughter Rebecca to Ireland and helped her to set up her dorm room for a gap year before starting college in New England. I'm one day back from Dublin, and I've already had a lot of contact with Rebecca. All of it is very sweet. There are text messages. She forgot a favorite red coat. She wants a green down puff jacket and a pink scarf. She'd like to drape over her bed as a canopy. Could I please mail them to her? I assembled her parcel and sent a text. On the way to the post office, I've downloaded Skype, and I'm ready for its unforgiving stare. Yet even on my first day home, I feel nostalgic. I sit in my basement surrounded by musty boxes, looking for the letters that my mother and I exchanged during my first year in college, the first time I lived away from home. The telephone was expensive. She wrote twice a week. I wrote once a week. I remember our letters as long, emotional, and filled with conflict. We were separating, finding our own way towards something new, and 40 years later, I find the letters and feel as though I hold her heart in my hands. As the days pass, I'm in regular contact with my daughter on Skype and by text. As though under some generational tutelage, I feel constrained to be charming and brief in our breezy, information-filled encounters. But once while texting, I'm overtaken by a thought. In 40 years, what will Rebecca know of her mother's heart as she found her way toward something new? Will she have the emotional letters that she can hold her mom's heart in her hand? Or just a faint memory of some texts with information? My challenge to you is, what are we trading? And is it worth it?
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.